Hi everybody, as it is our last class, I decided to wear the clothes I used to wear in class so as to celebrate this is our last class. And our last class is going to be connected with the Vietnam War in the Cold War. But before starting, I would like to emphasize the timeline of the Cold War. Started with the Berlin airlift, then the Berlin Wall, the Korean War, 1950-1953, the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1961 and 62, and the Vietnam War from 1955 to 1975. 19 years, 180 days from November the 1st, in 1955 to April the 30th in 1975. So it was a long war that I will try to summarize in a few minutes. What was happening in Vietnam? In the 19th century, France, remember 19th century, France was powerful and was a country which had a lot of colonies, decided to invade China, remember, and added a vast empire in South Asia, especially Indochina. She was interested in Indochina. But in the Second World War, Japan, when Japan declared war after Pearl Harbor in 1941 and became a powerful country, Japan invaded Indochina. The local people of Indochina refused to be governed by foreigners. One of those groups that resisted this invasion was the Vietnamese, which were led by Ho Chi Minh. Remember this name because it is important for this war in Korea. They organized resistance group in order to face and to fight against obviously Japan and the people who wanted to rule them. But as you know, in World War II, Japan had to surrender after the atomic bombs dropped in Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and when obviously the Japanese failed and decided to quit the war because they surrendered, the local people, the Vietnamese, decided to declare Vietnam a free country, an independent country. When they decided to become independent, the French, who had won the war, remember that the French won the war together with Great Britain and the Soviet Union, they decided that they were powerful enough to come back and take the possessions that they had before the invasion of Japan in that region of Indochina. So the French troops returned, and Ho Chi Minh, remember the leader, declared war on France. They resisted and declared war. So there was a war between Vietnam and France. The United States of America didn't approve the war. However, they gave economic support to France. They gave $1,000 million to France during the war, which lasted until 1954, from 1946 to 1954. Why did the Americans provide money to France? Because of the containment policy. They wanted to contain communism. They wanted to prevent communism from spreading. Vietnam, after the years that the war lasted, remember from 1946 to 1954, the Vietnamese group and Vietnam in general defeated the French. So in the peace conference, it was decided that Vietnam was going to be divided in the parallel 17th. The North Vietnam was going to be communist and the South Vietnam was going to be capitalist. The leader of the capital country, that is to say South Vietnam, was going to be Ngo Dinh Diem. Ngo Dinh Diem. So the United Nations and the intervention in Vietnam decided that elections should be organized, that elections should be held. But they realized that Ho Chi Minh was so popular and that the leader of the southern part of Vietnam was so unpopular that Ho Chi Minh, that was communist, was going to win the elections. So they decided to, the United Nations and the Western countries decided to stop these elections. And the United States promised to support the southern part of Vietnam, South Vietnam, in 1955. The president of that time in the United States was Dwight Eisenhower. He was in office from 1953 to 1961. And he believed in the domino theory. What was the domino theory? He said that if Vietnam became communists, all the other countries near were going to become communist. For example, Laos and Cambodia. In fact, Laos is still communist. And they might be the next target of communism. So the United States, with Dwight Eisenhower, decided to support Diem's government in the South. The leader of South Vietnam, supported by the United States, was very unpopular. And there was a group called the National Liberation Front. This group, mostly communists, fought against Diem in a kind of civil war. So Eisenhower, who was not more in turn, was replaced by John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Kennedy was in office from 1961 to 1963 until he was assassinated. And Kennedy took the decision of sending 10,000 advisors, in fact they were soldiers, to South Vietnam in order to keep on fighting and to resist and not to allow Vietnam to become a whole country under communism. When Kennedy was assassinated, he was replaced by Lyndon Johnson. And Lyndon Johnson had a different and a completely different policy. War started after an incident in the Gulf of Tonkin. So Lyndon Johnson was the president that started the war against Vietnam. What was the incident? In the Gulf of Tonkin, the incident was that the USA Navy patrolled the coast, and North Vietnam retaliated and attacked an American destroyer and sank an American destroyer. The incident in Tonkin was just an excuse for Lyndon Johnson, who was the president that started the war, that declared war on Vietnam. So Lyndon Johnson, who followed an aggressive policy in this war, decided to bomb specific targets, for example, army bases, industrial areas, factories, and railways. Also bridges, not to prevent the Vietnam from communicating with the different parts of the country. By 1966, the American planes were flying an average of 164 missions a day. So imagine the number of planes that were there. And the bombs, unfortunately, or I don't know if it was on purpose, but they missed their targets. Remember that the targets were supposed to be army bases, industrial areas, railway, and bridges. Well, the targets were hospitals. That is to say, bombs were dropped in hospitals and schools. So thousands of children and ill patients died with this bombing of Vietnam. When Lyndon Johnson became extremely unpopular because of this war, because the Americans sent 1 million soldiers and they realized that they were being killed. In fact, just 50% of the soldiers sent came back to the United States. So the United States lost 500,000 lives in the Vietnam War. So he became so unpopular that he didn't run for re-election. And the new president of the United States came to be Richard Nixon. When Richard Nixon became the president, he established a different policy. It was the policy of Vietnamization. What was this policy about? He kept on supplying armaments, weapons to South Vietnam, but the South Vietnamese would do the fighting, not the Americans. Many American troops were pulled out from Vietnam and came back to the United States. However, Richard Nixon began secretly bombing Cambodia and Laos in order to stop the supplies they were sending to North Vietnam. But all the same, the war was a disaster for the United States because with guerrilla tactics, the Vietnamese defeated although the Americans say that the war didn't end, and they were not defeated, they were defeated. So Richard Nixon, the president of the United States, knew that it was impossible. So when he started to order the troops to retreat, Nixon wanted a way out of the war, but wanted peace with honor. He wouldn't want to be humiliated. So the man who supplied this arrangement was the Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger was the architect of the peace treaty between Vietnam and the United States. Henry Kissinger, the architect of this peace treaty, also believed in the domino theory. Remember that Dwight Eisenhower, that Kennedy, that Lyndon Johnson, and lately the last president of the United States, Richard Nixon, believed in this domino theory. They were afraid that if Vietnam became communist, so would the rest of South Asia. And in fact, in part, they were right, because Laos and Cambodia became communist. Thailand, Burma, and Malaysia did not become communist. Another important effect of this war was the unification of Vietnam. Vietnam was united in 1976, but the country was a disaster, was destroyed because of the war and because of the bombing. The economy was in ruins. They used to be the great rice exporters, but from being the great rice exporters to the world, they could not feed their own citizens, so the country became extremely poor. The cost, another consequence of the war, 2 million Vietnamese died and 500,000 American soldiers died. So the cost of lives was too high. And finally, even this effect even lasts at present, the American bitterness because of this war. The small state of Vietnam had been superior to the United States, had beaten a superpower. Remember that after World War II, there were two superpowers, the Americans and the Soviets. Well, a small state had defeated a superpower. And this is a war that the Americans want to forget. So remember, this is all what we studied about the Cold War that finished with the perestroika in the 1980s, with Gorbachev and the new policy of the Soviet Union that nowadays does not exist anymore, because nowadays it is Russia, and all the 15 countries that we studied that became part of the Soviet Union nowadays are independent countries. So this is the last class. I hope this material helps you to sit for the subject, or to I would say to become your general knowledge more proficient about the history in the world, and to be able to connect ideas in the different events that occur from the French Revolution, our first class, to the Vietnam War, our last class in the Cold War. It was a pleasure for me. I hope to see you in the final exams. Bye bye.